Hello everyone, welcome back to Coach Craig Sports. Today is Tuesday, so we're going to be talking about the waiver wire for this week. Honestly, a lot of people are downplaying this waiver wire this week, and I'm not sure why. I think it's a pretty decent week for waivers. A lot of decently impactful guys in here, whether it's guys that you can play for just 1 week or season long as well. But without further ado, let's get into it. We'll start off with the quarterback position. I have 3 guys in total here. And the first one we're going to start out with is Derek Carr, 24 out of 36, 284 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, 19 yards rushing this past week. And that was against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is one of the better defenses in the league. Still put up a respectable performance, 23.26 fantasy points. That's in 6 point per passing touchdown leagues. He's only owned in 35% of ESPN leagues, 29% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against a favorable matchup against the Cleveland Browns this week. Obviously, you saw what Joe Burrow throw for over 400 yards against them last week. So it's definitely a matchup that Derek Carr and company can take advantage of. And I think he's somebody you can stream this week, and then even if you need to, you could play the rest of the season. He's probably a guy for me, probably like 3 to 5% of your fab budget. Next up, we got Teddy Bridgewater. Another solid performance from him last week, 23 out of 28, 254 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, 10 rushing yards, 23.16 fantasy points. He's owned in 39% of ESPN leagues, 44% Yahoo leagues, so it's kind of a coin flip if he's out there. He goes against a very favorable matchup against Atlanta's this week, so he's definitely a guy you could stream this week. Probably not going to play him all season, but there's definitely a lot worse options out there. But this week, he's more of a streamer. I see him as kind of like a 2% of your fab budget type of guy. Then we got Baker Mayfield. He kind of falls in the same category for me as Teddy Bridgewater. 22 out of 28, 297 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception, and negative 1 yards rushing last week against the Bengals, 39.78 fantasy points. He's only owned in 18% of ESPN leagues, 33% of Yahoo leagues, so there's a pretty good chance that he's out there. Goes in against the Las Vegas Raiders this week. Should be a pretty favorable matchup for him. He will be without Odell Beckham Jr., but in his career, he's actually put up probably better numbers without Odell playing, so we'll have to see how that affects him moving forward. He's more of a streamer guy this week. You might be able to play him in positive matchups in the future as well, so he's more like a 2% of your fab budget type of guy to me. Then we move over to the running back position. We'll start off with LaMichael Pirine. So LaMichael Pirine's a rookie out of Florida for the New York Jets. He's been getting a little bit more run more recent weeks. He played on 70% of the snaps this past week, 11 carries, 39 yards, and scored a touchdown. 3 targets, 2 receptions, 16 yards there as well, 13.5 fantasy points. And he's only owned in about 18% of leagues, so there's a pretty good chance that he's still out there in your league. And for a guy that's going to be getting a lot of the volume, especially later on in the season when he's a rookie, they're trying to figure out what they got in him. He goes against Kansas City this week. Not the best matchup in the world, but he's definitely somebody you could plug and play as a flex option, low-end running back too if you needed to. But for me, he's probably like a 10 to 15% of your fab budget type of guy at this point in time because he does have that long-term appeal. Then next up we got Zack Moss, another rookie running back, this time out of Utah. And he's with the Buffalo Bills. He played on 47% of snaps this past week. 7 carries for 47 yards. 3 targets, caught all 3 of them for 25 yards as well. And he had 10.2 fantasy points. He's a little bit more owned, 41% in ESPN leagues, 46% in Yahoo leagues. So it's kind of like a coin flip if he's out there. He goes against the Patriots defense, which on paper, you don't think of the Patriots defense as being too bad, but they've been torched by the run the last 2 weeks. And I kind of expect Zack Moss to take over in this game, so I think it's a great week to pick him up. And he falls into that 10 to 15% of your fab budget range for me as well. Maybe even upwards of 20%, because I think he's definitely a guy that could make an impact for the rest of the season. I just don't see it with Singletary, and I think this is finally a time where Moss is taking over. I thought it would happen a little bit sooner, but that injury that he did suffer before put him out for a couple weeks and made it a little bit longer time frame. Then we move over to Tevin Coleman. Tevin Coleman is currently on IR. He's expected to come back this week, though. Raheem Mostert's on IR now. Jeff Wilson Jr. had a terrific game this week, but sadly he is on IR with an ankle injury as well. So that leaves JaMycal Hasty and Jerick McKinnon left over. If Tevin Coleman comes off IR, he should see a good amount of touches this week. McKinnon's not getting very much run for whatever reason. I don't know if he's in the doghouse. I don't know if he's got a little injury that they're not telling us. But something's definitely up with him. So Coleman's a good option here, and he's a guy you could probably play in a couple weeks. He's owned in 21% of ESPN leagues, 27% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against Seattle this week. Not the best matchup in the world, but not the worst either. You obviously seen what the Vikings did against them, being able to run the ball. Chase Edmonds ran the ball pretty well late in the game last week for Arizona. So it's definitely a matchup you could play Coleman in if you needed to. He's probably like an 8 to 12% of your fab budget guy for me, because he does offer some value for a couple weeks, especially until Mostert and Wilson come back. But you just have to keep in mind that he's going to be splitting touches as well. So the other guy we'll talk about is JaMychal Hasty if Coleman were to miss. He's owned in 7% of ESPN leagues, 21% of Yahoo leagues. He's been getting a lot of hype in the community overall. He's not that good of a running back, but sometimes when opportunity presents itself, you become fantasy relevant. He's more like a 5% guy to me, because I think when Coleman does come back, Hasty's not going to get very much work at all. Then we'll move over to Wayne Gallman. Wayne Gallman played on 53% of the snaps on Thursday Night Football. He had 10 carries for 34 yards, 1 touchdown, 5 targets, caught all 5 of them for 20 yards, 16.4 fantasy points. He's only owned in 1% of ESPN leagues, 2% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against a tough matchup in Tampa Bay in Week 8, though. So the big thing to note here was Devonta Freeman did hurt his ankle on Thursday Night Football. Not sure if he's going to play this week, but if he does not play, it looks like Gallman will be the next man up. Deion Lewis could factor into the passing game just a little bit as well, but for the most part, it's going to be Gallman. He's not the greatest plug and play this week going against Tampa, so he's more like a 2 to 5% of your fab budget guy. But if Freeman were to miss multiple weeks, Gallman could have some value. And then before we get into wide receivers, I will mention the Seattle running backs as well. Chris Carson's out with a mid-foot sprain, so he's going to miss a week or two at least. And that would make people be like, oh, I should go grab Carlos Hyde. He got most of the carries in the Sunday Night Football game. If you go out and get Carlos Hyde, I'd spend like maybe 1% of my fab budget on him. He's dealing with a hamstring injury as well late in that game, so there's a chance that he doesn't play as well. Then you could mention Travis Homer, but he had a little bit of a knee injury too now. None of these guys I really want to spend for. If you want to put in a $0 bid on them, if you can in your league, go right ahead. Otherwise, maybe wait till waivers, see how it shakes out. Then for the wide receiver position, we got Sterling Shepard. He returned from IR, played on 77% of snaps on Thursday Night Football. 8 targets, 6 receptions, 59 yards, 1 touchdown, 17.9 fantasy points. So a pretty good day overall coming back. It was nice to see it for him. So he's definitely going to have some fantasy value. He's owned in 38% of ESPN leagues, 29% of Yahoo leagues. So there's a pretty good chance that he's out there. Goes against Tampa Bay in Week 8. So not a very good matchup for him overall. He's definitely somebody, if you pick him up, you're probably going to stash him on your bench this week and then see how he is playing forward. But he's probably a guy, he's got enough talent that he could be an 8 to 10% of your fab budget type of guy. Next up, we got Preston Williams. By week, last week, owned in 38% of ESPN leagues, 21% of Yahoo leagues. So there's a pretty good chance that he's out there. Goes against the Rams in Week 8. Not the best matchup in the world, but not a bad matchup at all. At this point, he's a bench stash that we're looking to pick up with Tua Tagovailoa taking over at quarterback. I think that Preston Williams and Mike Gesicki will be the two that benefit the most from Tua playing quarterback, since they are both bigger receivers. I think that will help Tua out, especially early on. I do not expect Tua to come in and light the world on fire. He's not going to come in. He's not going to be Justin Herbert or some of these good games that Joe Burrow had. Yes, he'll have a couple good games here and there, but I do not expect very much from him, especially early on in the season. But with that being said, if Williams is able to see the targets, he could have a lot of value, but he's purely a bench stash at this point. He's a guy that I'm probably willing to spend 3 to 5% of my fab budget on at this point in time. Next up is Brandon Aiyuk. He played on 76% of snaps. He had 7 targets, caught 6 of them for 110 yards, 17.5 fantasy points. He's owned in 27% ESPN leagues and about half of Yahoo leagues. Goes against Seattle this week in Week 8. Very good matchup. He's a guy that I would go pretty hard after this week, honestly, because Deebo Samuel's out for a couple of weeks now, and Brandon Ayuk's going to be the primary target. We've seen him produce when he's given the targets, and going against Seattle this week, you can definitely play him right away. So for me, he's like a 10 to 15% of my budget type of guy, maybe even upwards of 18% if I need a wide receiver. I think he's definitely somebody that's going to have some value for the next couple of weeks, and as the season goes along, he could have more value as well. I'll talk about Denzel Mims. He's a rookie wide receiver for the Jets. He's not a guy I like a whole lot, but I had to put him on this list because he played on 79% of the snaps coming off of IR. He saw 7 targets, 4 receptions, 42 yards. I know it's not a great line overall, but for a rookie in his first game, these are encouraging numbers. 8.2 fantasy points. He's only owned in about 4% of leagues. Goes against Kansas City this week, who's not the greatest against the pass. I don't expect too much from Sam Darnold and these wide receivers, so it's not like I want to go out and play Mims right away this week. But for me, he's a guy that you can stash on your bench, see what he does, see if he keeps it up. Jamison Crowder did miss last week. Rashard Perriman is injured as well right now. So if they were both to miss this week, and Mims gets upward of 9 targets, it could be a decent day for him. You just got to take all this with a little bit of a grain of salt, though. Mims as a prospect is still very raw. He works pretty well into the offense that they do run, but like I said, he's still raw. So he's the guy that I'm probably willing to spend 2% of my, maybe like 2% of my fab budget on, and put him on my bench, see what he does. If he doesn't do anything for a couple of weeks, then we just drop him. Not the end of the world, but a guy that's worth taking a flyer on at this point in time. Then we got Rashard Higgins, playing on 85% of the snaps after Odell Beckham Jr. left the game. Odell Beckham Jr. has a torn ACL now, so Higgins is going to step in his place. Another name to keep out for is Donovan Peoples-Jones. It looks like they prefer Higgins at this time. Peoples-Jones is a rookie, 6th-round pick, so we'll see a little bit of both these guys, but I think Higgins is the guy to own. He saw 6 targets, caught all of them, 110 yards. 17 fantasy points, owned in less than 1% of ESPN leagues, 4% of Yahoo leagues somehow. And he goes against a positive matchup this week against the Raiders, so you could probably even throw him in this week if you really needed a wide receiver. He's a guy that I'm willing to spend upward of 5% on. I think he's got a decent chance to put up some numbers, and Baker's got to throw the ball to somebody. I know Jarvis Landry is going to get his targets. I know the tight ends are going to get their targets, but they still need another wide receiver on this offense. Last but not least for wide receiver is Alshon Jeffrey. We talked about him last week. Still has yet to play in 2020. He's owned in 15% of ESPN leagues, 12% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against Dallas in Week 8. Deshaun Jackson did return last week, but then he got hurt again, so he's going to be out for a couple of weeks again. So if Jeffrey comes back, he definitely could have a target share. Definitely has a good matchup here. Kind of sucks if he does play because you probably can't roll him out and trust him because how many snaps he's actually going to play. Coming off the injury that he's been dealing with. But he's definitely a guy that offers some long-term upside, so he's probably a guy you can spend 5% of your budget on if you need to. Then we'll move over to the tight end position. We'll talk about Trey Burton once again. Last week he was on bye. These are his stats from Week 6. He's still pretty available. He's owned in 10% of ESPN leagues, 21% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against the Lions in Week 8. Should be a pretty positive matchup for him overall. And he's definitely a guy that I like going forward, especially if you're a tight end needy team. You could spend 5% of your budget, maybe up towards 7% of your budget on him. I think he definitely has a role going forward. Just keep in mind, tight ends in general have been so hit or miss this year. A lot of them are touchdown or bust. But I think he does offer a decent floor in PPR that he's not going to hurt you on any given week. Then we got to talk about Harrison Bryant. Austin Hooper, he had appendicitis, had his appendix removed a couple days before the game. Sounds like he's going to miss this week as well. Harrison Bryant played on 77% of snaps this past week, saw 5 targets, 4 receptions, 56 yards, and 2 touchdowns, 21.6 fantasy points, only owned in about 1% of leagues. Goes against the Raiders this week. The Raiders are like average against the tight end position, I would say, honestly. Last year they were pretty bad against the tight end, but Corey Littleton coming in kind of helped them out a little bit. I do expect Bryant to have a decent game, but he's not somebody I'm going out to rush and pick up because Austin Hooper is coming back. If you need a tight end for this week, you could probably spend 1 to 2% of your fab budget on him. You might not get him. Somebody else might go crazy after they've seen the big week that he put up, but just keep in mind Austin Hooper is going to be back. The Browns are also on the bye in Week 9, so he's pretty much just going to help you for 1 week. Then we got Richard Rodgers. I talked a little bit about him last week. Obviously, Zack and Dallas Goedert have both been missing in action. And Richard Rodgers played 85% of snaps on Thursday Night Football, saw 8 targets, caught 6 of them for 85 yards. A very solid game overall, 14.5 fantasy points. He's only owned in 7% of ESPN leagues, 9% of Yahoo leagues. Goes against Dallas in Week 8. So a pretty good matchup for him overall. And he's definitely somebody you can plug and play until Goddard or Ertz returns. And so I'm looking at him as probably like a 3% of your fab budget guy if you need a tight end. Then the last tight end I'm going to talk about is Logan Thomas. He played on 78% of snaps. So his snap rate's been like over 75% the whole season. A lot of times even in the 80s or 90s. So he's definitely on the field a lot. He saw 4 targets, caught all 4 of them, 60 yards, 1 touchdown, 16 fantasy points overall. He's owned in 11% of ESPN leagues, 25% of Yahoo leagues. I think he's definitely a guy that makes a big impact for the rest of the season. But he's on bye this week, so that's why I have him last on the tight ends. He's definitely a guy you can spend probably 2 to 3% of your fab budget on and pick him up and just kind of stash him this week if you need a tight end going forward. Then last but not least, we got the defenses to consider for this week. I got the Chargers once again. They are owned in 46.5% ESPN leagues, 75% Yahoo leagues. So there's not the best chance they're out there. They go against Denver this week. Denver's been pretty rough. Drew Lock's thrown 2 interceptions in back-to-back games. Don't expect that to change anytime soon. The Chargers do have a pretty decent defense overall. Next up, we got Tennessee, 16% owned in ESPN leagues, 27% owned in Yahoo leagues. Goes against Cincinnati in Week 8. Cincinnati is kind of banged up on the offensive line. They weren't great before that. Joe Burrow's still a rookie. The Tennessee defense is a little bit better than the Browns defense, so they could cause some turnovers in this matchup. If Joe Mixon does not play, Gio Bernard is not going to be much of a threat in the running game either, so could make them a little bit one-dimensional. Definitely a good matchup here, though. And then last but not least, we got Green Bay. They are owned in 10% ESPN leagues, 20% Yahoo leagues. Go against the Vikings this week. The Vikings have had a little bit of issues this year. Kirk Cousins has been turnover prone. So this is definitely a matchup you can take advantage of. But with that being said, that's all I got for waivers this week. Like I said, it's an interesting week for waiver wires. I think there's a lot of guys out there that can actually help you, whether it's this week or long term. Don't underestimate it like some of the other people in the community are. If you guys have any more in-depth questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments, or feel free to reach out to me at CoachCraigSports@gmail.com, on Twitter at CoachCraigSport, or on the Coach Craig Sports Facebook page. If you guys liked and enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. It helps build the community that we're trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports. And that's a community built around you, the viewer, helping you enjoy fantasy football more, helping you be more successful in fantasy football, and helping to bring some championship trophies to your guys' mantles. With that being said, if you guys are new or current subscribers who have yet to do so, also hit that notification bell. It'll let you know every single time I post up a video. If you guys are new to my videos, I post up about 5 videos a week. But with that being said, that's all I got for this video. I hope you guys all enjoyed. Hopefully you guys can pick up some of these waiver wire targets we talked about this week, and have a great rest of your day.